So here we're going to talk a bit about the women who fought in the 1916 Easter Rising, because we're continuously told, we hear all the time about the men who fought in the 1916 Rising. We hear very, very little about the women who fought alongside these men in an attempt to liberate Ireland. With the exception of Constance Markievicz, the role of women in the 1916 Rising it's largely been forgotten. It's estimated that out of a total of 1,600 people that fought in the Easter Rising, around 220 of these were women, and 77 of those were imprisoned in Feimineach jail in the aftermath of the Rising. In fact, the only place in Dublin that didn't have any women stationed fighting alongside the men was the Boland's Mill garrison, which was actually under the command of Eamon de Valera, who we now have to thank for today's constitution. And apparently at the time, Eamon de Valera didn't want to, and this is a direct quote, didn't want to put women in danger by having them fighting alongside him in Boland's Mill. Now, according to a lot of sources, this was actually it was actually directly in defiance of the orders of Pearse and Connolly, who wanted women fighting in Boland's Mill. There was one Cumann na Mban member who remarked after the Rising, her name was Sheila Ballydonica, and she said, De Valera refused absolutely to have Cumann na Mban girls in the posts. The result, I believe, was that the garrison there did not stand up to the suit as well as in other posts. So, weapons training at this stage had become an integral part of Cumann na Mban's core activities. And actually rifle training was one of the activities that was specifically mentioned in their constitution. And you'll see from the military archives in Dublin that there are a huge amount of documents, documenting how highly proficient women were in the weapons, in a wide range of the weapons that they used. So the women that fought in the Easter Rising, they certainly weren't there to just simply run messages or make tea. They were there to fight alongside, shoulder to shoulder with their male comrades. It was actually Constance Markievicz who shot a policeman in the head on the Stephen's Green after she had spent the day out doing sniper attacks on the British troops in the city centre. And it was Constance Markievicz as well who had wanted to bomb the Shelbourne Hotel. Michael Mallon was her superior officer at the time, and he initially said no way because it presented too many risks to the women. But eventually he relented and said fair enough. And a lot of women were actually shot on the way from the Stephen's Green to the Shelbourne. So the Irish Citizen Army had expressly committed its female volunteers to fight alongside the men, and the women had a very, very core part in a lot of the attacks that took place. There was a group of a contingent of 19 people, 10 men and 9 women under the command of Sean Connolly, who attacked Dublin Castle gates. Now, unfortunately, their attack, they failed and they had to retreat back to City Hall. And eventually, after when it was decided that they had to surrender, it was the only officer that was actually present at the time was Kathleen Lynn, and it was Kathleen Lynn who went and delivered the surrender order to the British military authorities. Now, the British didn't really know what to do when they were presented with all these women, and when they got surrender orders, initially they were like, what is this? Like, why is there a woman giving this to me? But eventually they had to accept that these women were fighting legitimately alongside their male comrades. When they found women in other garrisons, they actually just asked a lot of them to go home because they had no idea what to do. And the women refused. And women like Kathleen Lynn were actually sentenced to death when they were in Feimineach jail. And a lot of the women who were sentenced to death went on hunger strike and had their sentences commuted to life imprisonment. Now, eventually they were actually released. Among the last people to leave the GPO here there were 3 women. Women and the wounded were all generally evacuated on the Friday, but 3 women stayed behind in the GPO. They were Julia Grennan, Elizabeth O'Farrell and Winifred Carney. And then they retreated to a nearby house on Moore Street. It was actually Elizabeth O'Farrell who Pearse had asked to deliver the surrender note to Brigadier General Lowe, who was down on Cornell Street. And when she went out, again, she was faced with the same response from the British forces, who didn't know what to do with this woman bringing the surrender order. Eventually it was accepted after a lot of ridicule and whatnot. But one of the things about Elizabeth O'Farrell is, like so many women in Irish history, she's completely written out. And there's one picture that survives of her, well, it's kind of her participation in the Rising, which my sister's going to hold up. And if you see here, this is Pierce and British people, British soldiers. And this down here, that's actually Elizabeth O'Farrell's feet. And that's all, yeah, so she's literally airbrushed out of Irish history like so many other women who took part. So in the years that followed though, followed the Easter Rising, women played a very, very high profile in the fledgling state. There were 6 women deputies elected to the first Dáil in May 1921, and there were 43 councillors, female councillors were elected, and Kathleen Lynn actually went on to become the first female Lord Mayor of Dublin. Women also served as judges in the Dáil courts from 1919 to 1921. And all of these developments and what women had done, it was incredibly revolutionary considering what other women in Europe were faced with at the same time. Even Cumann na Món reiterated at their annual convention in 1921 that their primary aim was to follow the policy of the Republican Proclamation by seeing that women take their proper position in the life of the nation. However, as the country descended into civil war in the early 1920s, the newly founded Free State reverted to traditional Catholic values, and unfortunately for women who played such a prominent role in Cumann na Món and in the Citizen Army and in the Rising and so on, their activities, which were already breaching anything that was considered normal gender roles at the time, was not only now considered very, very unseemly by the state, but it was also considered a threat to the very existence of that state itself. Thank you.